If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Victim blaming is devastatingly common all over the globe. Some people in law enforcement, the media, mental health professionals, and citizens treat certain murder victims they view as lesser than with no respect, as if they are throwaway people not as worthy of justice and care as some other people are. The victims' families even get pushed to the wayside. Some police even tell family members they're working on the case, or they'll let them know something as soon as they can, but they never do. A lot of murder victims who don't get the justice they deserve are sex workers, addicts, homeless, Black, Indigenous, and brown people in general, LGBTQ+ people, and people who may be poor or so-called lower class. These human beings, who have just as much worth as anyone else, are more likely to be accused of, quote, asking for it, because of ignorance and fallacies surrounding the victim and their actions. All people should be treated equally in every aspect of life, which includes the duties of law enforcement to investigate every crime and every murder the same. This shouldn't have to be said, but it does. Police and citizens alike need to care about every victim, no matter where they come from or what their lifestyle is. Stop saying things that point the finger at the victim. The only person at fault is the perpetrator, and some people do not grasp that at all. All victims matter. Today's story is about Adolfo Vega. I went to his sister Nancy because I wanted to share his story. Justice has not yet come for her brother or their family. There has also been a lot of victim blaming due to his lifestyle, which is something I simply cannot tolerate. The police and others have refused to talk to Adolfo's mother, who is the next of kin, or his sister Nancy on many occasions, yet the detective did talk to Nancy's Caucasian brother-in-law. You can hear Nancy talk about her brother and what happened to him on the podcasts True Consequences and Hands Off My Podcast. Let's get into this heartbreaking story of Adolfo Vega's murder, which is still, in some aspects, a mystery. Adolfo Jimenez Vega was born on July 9, 1980 in Coronado, California. He had many siblings, and he was his mother Antonia's baby. Adolfo was her 6th child. His sister Nancy joked, quote, "We think he was our dad's 20th something kid." Nancy told me about having so many siblings, a lot of them being half-siblings. Quote, "Daddy was a rolling stone, and wherever he laid his hat is where he called home." The family moved to Tehachapi, California in 1984 when Adolfo was 4 years old. In 1986, their mother's firstborn son, Jesus Torres, was murdered in Kern County and never received justice. Afterwards, Antonia, Nancy, and Adolfo moved to San Diego, where they had also lived before. Adolfo and Nancy would bounce back and forth between their parents' houses. Nancy also mentioned that there was domestic violence in the home, and even though she doesn't remember it, possibly because her brain has blocked out the trauma, Adolfo remembered it well. On top of that, from the ages of 6 to 12, Adolfo really had a hard time going back and forth from his father's house to his mother's house constantly. From his teen years into his adulthood, girls fawned over Adolfo. He had charm, swagger, played football, and in a room full of people, ever since he was young, Adolfo was the person everyone would gravitate towards because he was fun, kind, would make you laugh, and he was the life of the party. Adolfo was an animal lover, enjoyed bodybuilding, was a very caring person who loved helping others, and he deeply cherished his family and friends. Adolfo found a lot of enjoyment in picking on his siblings. He would tell them that out of all the siblings, he was the best looking. Nancy joked that he was a pain in her ass, as most younger siblings can be, but he was also her best friend. Through all of this, however, Nancy said that growing up in a Mexican household and in Mexican culture in general, as far as discipline and rules being extremely strict, Adolfo sometimes struggled with that, which may have contributed to some issues he battled with throughout his life. Nancy wants to make it clear she in no way puts any fault on her mother or father. The way a lot of parents discipline and their behaviors in general come from the ones who raised them. It's what they knew at the time and the only example they had to go by. Their parents did what they thought was right due to how they were raised, and they did the best they could. Nancy mentioned that in Hispanic culture, parents are usually saying, quote, "What happens in this house stays in this house," as well as mental health issues being blown off at times, not taken seriously, or not really talked about. Nancy wants to make a change in the community. She started going to college and is now working towards her master's degree in counseling. Next year, she will be on her way to receiving her PhD. Nancy said Adolfo has always been her reason to take this path in her career. Now, during Adolfo's preteen years is when their father began to roam around, getting with other women. This impacted Adolfo in a negative way when his father became involved with a woman who he essentially spent all his time with and took on her kids as his own. This made Adolfo feel abandoned, lost, and left behind. Adolfo became a young father at the age of 15, and as he got older, he had more children. As of recently, he had become a grandfather. During Adolfo's teen years, as he began to feel more depressed, he started to dabble in drugs to numb the pain. As the siblings got older, Adolfo stayed in Tehapachi, and Nancy moved out of state. Earlier, I mentioned Adolfo being the life of the party. Nancy believes that he was, like so many others, always putting on this happy front because he was battling issues within himself. He loved making others laugh, and he liked acting silly. At the same time, that was a way to mask the pain. Adolfo fought his demons with drugs for a long time. There were stretches of time where he would stay clean, but he would unfortunately relapse. There was a period of 8 or 9 years when Adolfo was in prison, and when he was released, he stayed clean, until he got into a very toxic relationship, which led to him falling back into his old habits. He decided it was time for a change. He began attending UEI College, which is the United Education Institute, to become a certified nursing assistant. He was doing very well, but according to him, he was sexually assaulted by a student at the school. He allegedly talked to someone at UEI and asked if he could change schools or in some way have himself and the person who assaulted him separated so he wouldn't have to be around that person. The school supposedly denied him any assistance with this matter, so he dropped out. After he dropped out, he turned to drugs again. He also moved to California City, where he was staying with his mother. He did great for a while and stopped using drugs, but it was a vicious cycle of being off again, on again. Addiction is sadly one of the most powerful beasts to overcome. Adolfo was eventually confronted by his brother and mother because they were all concerned about him, wanting him to get off drugs for good and get his life together. As much as he loved and cared about his family, he knew he wasn't going to stop using. He was aware that he couldn't do drugs around them, and he didn't exactly want to hear right then what anybody had to say, as those of us who love an addict know all too well how that goes. Therefore, he made the decision to start living on the streets. He was mainly homeless from around the beginning of 2022 to April of 2022. Adolfo would keep in touch with his family for the most part, and often his family would go looking for him to see how he was doing if they hadn't heard from him or seen him in a while. They stayed in contact with him as best they could. On April 2nd, 2022, Adolfo was assaulted by 2 men. I will call them TA and DC. According to the police report, Adolfo had been walking and the heat was getting to him, so he decided to sit in the shade. TA pointed a firearm at Adolfo and pulled the trigger, but it malfunctioned. TA passed the gun over to DC, who also tried to shoot Adolfo, but the gun kept malfunctioning. TA also had a golf club with him and began beating Adolfo with it. So much so, TA fractured Adolfo's left arm. TA also beat him in the back of the head until Adolfo lost consciousness. A woman who had been recording the incident drove Adolfo to the Hall ambulance station around 3 that afternoon. An officer was dispatched to the Tehapachi Hospital to talk to Adolfo about the incident. When the officer walked into the emergency room and looked at Adolfo, he saw that his pillow was bloody, and so was the front of his clothes. He had to have 3 stitches in the back of his head and a cast on his left arm for the open fracture. The officer sat down and asked Adolfo what happened. He said DC was the first one to come up to him and started accusing him of talking shit about one of his friends. Adolfo said he didn't know what DC was talking about. Then DC started swinging his fist at him, but he missed. He ran off and came back with TA, who was armed with a gun and a golf club. That's when the gun began to malfunction each time they tried to shoot him. The 2 men were so confused as to why the gun wasn't working and started attacking Adolfo with the golf club. After he came out of his unconscious state, a woman who lives in the area had been recording everything and drove him to the Hall ambulance station. As the officer sat by Adolfo's hospital bed, he asked if he could describe the 2 men involved. Adolfo did so and told the officer which apartments they stayed at. From prior interactions with the 2 men, the officer knew exactly where to go. TA and DC were arrested and taken to the Mojave jail by night shift officers. After a police officer talked to someone at Kern County Probation, he found out that DC was an active felon on probation. All 3 statements had a few differences in them. TA said Adolfo walked up and was tripping. Then he saw DC and Adolfo start arguing, which turned into a physical altercation. TA denied any involvement, saying he and Adolfo never even touched each other or exchanged any words. TA even claimed he didn't point a firearm at Adolfo and claimed there were no guns involved at all. After the officer found 2 black pistol-style replica firearm BB guns inside of a garage, he took TA to jail. DC was also arrested and put in jail for a list of charges. When questioned, DC stated that he was working on a dirt bike with TA when Adolfo supposedly walked up to him. DC suspected that Adolfo was trying to steal from him and confronted him about it. DC stated that he punched Adolfo in the face and the 2 began to fight. According to DC, Adolfo pulled a small hammer out of his back pocket, and that's when DC called for TA to come over, telling him to, quote, "Get that thing," meaning the replica firearm BB gun. When TA gave DC the BB gun, he tried to fire it at Adolfo, but it was out of BBs, so he threw it to the ground and told TA to bring him the golf club. DC said that he grabbed the golf club and started beating Adolfo with it, striking him in the head and forearm. Supposedly, DC fell to the ground and Adolfo told him to get up as he walked away. DC also told the police that TA never touched Adolfo. Police tried to contact the witness who recorded the incident. They went to her residence, but she didn't come to the door. The two men's charges were for using a deadly weapon other than a firearm, which is a felony, assault with a firearm on another person, a felony, battery with serious bodily injury, which is a felony, exhibiting a firearm, which is a misdemeanor, conspiracy to commit a crime, a felony, and brandishing a firearm replica, a misdemeanor. DC and TA were put in jail on April 4th, 2022. We'll come back to this situation in just a little bit. It wasn't until April 5th that Adolfo's family even knew he was in the hospital. When Nancy talked to Adolfo, he had talked about changing his life, and his sister told him, "Please, turn your life around. I don't want our mother to bury another son." They told each other, "I love you," and that would be the last conversation Nancy ever had with her little brother. Adolfo's mother and brother picked him up from the hospital, and they had an argument on the way home. Adolfo left, but he went back to his mother Antonia's on the 6th to shower and make a few phone calls. He asked his mother to drop him off a few blocks away because he had a few things to do, and that he would be back soon. Antonia waited at home for her son to return. She waited and waited until there was a knock on her door. It was the coroner, and Antonia was told that Adolfo was dead. The coroner and another official with them began to victim blame Adolfo almost immediately, telling his mother that if Adolfo had not been where he was, he would not have been killed. The victim blaming of Adolfo is something that still happens today. Nancy's phone rang around 11 p.m. on August 6th, and it was her other brother telling her that Adolfo had been killed. She couldn't comprehend it at first, and then could only keep saying, "What? What? Wait, what?" After she got off the phone with her brother and collected herself, she called the California City Police Department. The first dispatcher was nice to Nancy as she explained who she was and that she had just received the news that her brother, Adolfo Vega, had been shot and killed. Nancy wanted to know who she needed to talk to for information on what happened and what was going on. She was told Detective Hansen was handling the case and he would be the one she needed to get in touch with. But he was at the scene at that time, currently taking her brother's body to Bakersfield, California, to the coroner's. While all of this was happening, the assault that took place before Adolfo's death, well, the police couldn't find any other witnesses. Unfortunately, with the only witness now deceased, police decided to release the two men and dismiss all the charges. Nancy saw on social media allegations that her brother was attempting to break into a house and was shot. She thought to herself, "That doesn't seem like him at all. I know him. I know the things he has done and what he does, but he would never break into someone's home." Antonia and their other brother called on the 7th to try to talk to Detective Hansen, but they couldn't reach him, so they left their information. He never called back. Nancy called the night of the 7th knowing she may not get much information because it was an ongoing investigation. But they wanted to hear something from law enforcement, anything. She talked to the detective and he wouldn't tell her anything. Not even if this was going to be an open casket funeral or a closed casket funeral. Nancy could tell at first that he had her on speaker. She told him that she knew Adolfo's lifestyle and she wasn't trying to make him out to be a saint by any means, but he is her loved one and she wanted to know what happened to him. The detective asked her who the next of kin was, and she told him that would be their mother, Antonia, but her mother couldn't really carry a conversation in English. However, if they had a Mexican native there, they could speak to her. The detective continued to talk to Nancy instead, telling her that he could not tell her anything and he didn't appreciate her attitude. She was so caught off guard because she had not given him any attitude at all. Nancy told him she didn't have an attitude. She just wanted to know what happened because she and her family were grieving horribly and they would like to know who murdered Adolfo. The detective kept telling her that she had an attitude, so she dropped it. Nancy took a breath and asked him a question that most people might not ask if they were in her shoes. I have to say, it was a pretty ballsy move. Nancy had been hearing from a lot of different people that the detective might be related to either one of the people who assaulted her brother or the person who killed her brother. The streets were buzzing about a lot of different things, which was making her head spin. Nancy bravely expressed to the detective what she was hearing, and she was very polite about it. She simply wanted truthful answers to her questions. The detective immediately took her off speakerphone and told her he didn't understand the question. Nancy asked, "Do you not understand my English or the question?" He replied that he didn't understand the question. Nancy repeated everything and he chuckled at her, condescendingly telling her she shouldn't believe everything she hears on the street and only trust what the police tell her. Nancy was quick to say, quote, "No, sorry, I'm going to come to my own conclusions when I have information, because for one, I understand the streets sometimes lie, but I also understand that some police officers are corrupt." The detective ended up telling Nancy that he would give her information over to his sergeant and that the sergeant would enlighten her on any questions she had. Then he ended the conversation. A few minutes later, the sergeant called, and he was much nicer than the detective was, but again, Nancy and her family were given no information. She was so distraught, frustrated, and heartbroken. Then her mother said something that made Nancy cry. Antonia told her daughter, "I'm proud of you." Nancy asked, "Proud? Proud of me for what?" Her mother said, "For speaking correctly in English and asking the questions for your brother to try to get answers." Nancy told her mother that she didn't have to thank her at all. Antonia told her, I wish I would have had someone like you when my first son was murdered in 1986. Someone to ask questions and help me, but I didn't have anyone to do that for me. Months went by, and everything the Vega family found out was through social media and the news. Here is what we do know. April 6th, 2022, 10 days before Nancy's birthday, 41-year-old Adolfo Vega walked to Rite Aid to get his pain medications he had to take for his fractured arm, which was still in a sling. From there, we can only speculate what truly happened. Either he walked or he was possibly driven to an abandoned house not far away. The man next door to the abandoned house confronted Adolfo with a gun. This man, who I will not name due to upcoming court hearings, was held in custody and gave his versions of events. He claimed he told Adolfo, "I know you're trying to break into that abandoned house," and in the man's own words, Adolfo began walking away. While doing so, allegedly, Adolfo said something sarcastic, and the man shot him. He said he shot Adolfo as he was walking away. Adolfo also had no weapon, and his arm was in a sling. The bullet went through Adolfo's arm, traveled through the right side of his chest, and through his fractured arm. He died in the driveway of that abandoned home. The pain medication that he had picked up from Rite Aid right before this incident, well, they were nowhere to be found. So, is there more to the story than the neighbor is saying? It seems likely. Could it have been a drug deal gone wrong? With Adolfo's pain pills missing, it raises a lot of questions. It's sad that the family may never know what the man's real motive was behind his decision to murder Adolfo senselessly that night. At 6:45 p.m., Adolfo left the Rite Aid, per the Rite Aid receipt, and by 7:11, someone called 911 about the shooting. What happened in those 26 minutes? We may never truly know, because the killer's word is all anyone has. In the neighbor's house, the police found 2 handguns and a shotgun. One of the handguns was suspected to have been used to shoot Adolfo. The family was not made aware of any of this information. They found it all out on a local Facebook neighborhood watch page. They were also interviewed by a local news station, NBC7 KGET. The man who confessed to killing Nancy's brother was let go on August 8th, 2022, and shortly after, he and his wife sold their house. Why would they suddenly sell their house? Kind of odd, isn't it? As Nancy understands it, the man's wife was allegedly arrested for obstruction the night of her brother's murder. She's not sure in what capacity the woman was involved. Obviously, the police are not doing enough investigating because the neighbors in that area have cameras on their homes, even one house having a camera pointing right at the crime scene. Why haven't they talked to the neighbors at all? Why wouldn't they know, if they are even investigating, that the house nearby has a camera pointing directly at the scene? That footage should have been viewed a long time ago, and to my knowledge, it never has been. Nancy knows the detective has already had interactions with Adolfo in the past, and she didn't believe there would be an investigation without bias in the first place. Honestly, it doesn't seem like there was an investigation at all. On Nancy's TikTok, which is at Justice for Adolfo Vega, she went to the abandoned home to see if it had indeed been broken into. The windows have dust piled up on them and cobwebs all over them, as do the doors. It's as if the whole place has not been touched in years. So, the story that the neighbor gave about Adolfo supposedly attempting to break into that abandoned house doesn't seem plausible. Speaking of her TikTok, the murderer's ex-wife, at least the TikTok username is the ex-wife's name, has been watching and liking Nancy's videos. This could be to keep the killer informed, or it could be the killer watching using his ex-wife's name. On April 26th, the Vega family buried a son, a brother, a father, a grandfather, a cousin, and they are still wondering why. Antonia Vega lost her first son in 1986 and her last-born son in 2022. She's completely heartbroken, she rarely sleeps, and she sits by Adolfo's picture every single day as she cries. There are way too many unanswered questions. The Vega family deserves to know the truth. What they don't deserve is the constant victim blaming from law enforcement and others about Adolfo's lifestyle or being at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not going to fly. No matter what a person's lifestyle is or where they are at a certain time is not an excuse for anyone to be murdered in cold blood. Victim blaming is what we're not going to tolerate. The current update is one that I hope will lead down the path to justice. Nancy had emailed the California City Mayor, the General Attorney, spoke to the Mexican consulate, and began to spread the word on all her social media platforms to let everyone know that law enforcement wouldn't talk to them or help them, and the murderer even confessed but was released from custody. After Nancy did these things, something finally happened. On July 11th, 2022, 2 days after Adolfo's 42nd birthday, the killer was charged with 1 count of voluntary manslaughter and another count of involuntary manslaughter. There is a preliminary hearing on November 30th, 2022 to see if this will go to a preliminary hearing on December 1st, 2022. When there are more developments, I will let you all know with bonus episode updates. Please keep the Vega family in your thoughts and prayers. Please sign the petition in the show notes. I'll also have it posted on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. You can send your love and support to Nancy Vega on Twitter at Adolfo Vega 2022. on Instagram at NancyBeingNancy, and follow her TikTok at Justice for Adolfo Vega. I'll have all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode about Adolfo Vega. Nancy will keep me posted if there is anything further that we can do. For now, please share his story and sign the petition. Until next time, everyone please stay safe, take care of yourselves and one another.